Hi there, Oscar from MST.TV here.
And Nishi.
And today we're discussing soft cheating. So soft cheating is actually a very, very serious topic that I've wanted to go into for a very long time. And a lot of players kind of throw this term around without understanding the weight behind it. And we want to clarify it and let people know a little more about soft cheating.
So effectively, all that soft cheating is where one player makes a play that is technically illegal, but neither party can determine really whether or not that play was intentional or unintentional.
Yeah, so I've actually been guilty of soft cheating before, and it was completely unintentional on my part. Back in Bujin format, I played Bujins, and I would make Bujin Kagetsuchi with Yamato and something like a turtle. Now, I did that for about half a format before anyone said anything, and it was actually when I played a friend of mine who was a very skilled player, and I respect him a lot for this. And he told me that, hey, you can't make Kagetsuchi with Turtle and Yamato. And I was like, no, I've always made it. Like, it's like, Susanoo can be made with 2 Bujin cards. Why can't I make this Bujin card, right? So he tells me to read the card, and I read it. It says, 2 Beast Warrior monsters. And I was just incredibly shocked and surprised, and I apologized to him right away. But that's how easy it is to soft cheat. It's so unintentional for players to not know this. And it gets mixed up with a lot of pro players who try to just force themselves into soft cheating to get outs for situations they don't actually have outs to, and just pray that the opponent won't catch it. But it's really important for you as a player to catch soft cheating.
So technically, there is no official definition for soft cheating according to Konami. Really, Konami only differentiates between cheating and accidental play. So on one hand, cheating has really severe penalties, whereas a play that's accidental only warrants reversal in game state.
Yeah, if you're caught cheating, this is potential game loss, potential DQ, potential ban. Players who've been caught cheating or stacking before have been banned from tournaments. So the difference between penalties between just being caught doing an illegal play accidentally and cheating is incredibly different. And soft cheating is kind of this player-defined definition that is the middle ground, where it's hard to determine if a player really is cheating or not. So a lot of players are now going to ask, what do you do when you get soft cheated? Now the best thing to do is to just prevent yourself from being soft cheated by just checking everything. Now that's a little broad, and we're going to go over some tips on that later. But right now, we're going to go over some penalties.
Yeah, so when you do call a judge over because you've caught someone soft cheating, or they call you out on soft cheating, there are a couple of different things that can happen. So the first thing that'll happen is when the game state is repairable. So for example, one player has a Thunder King on board, and the other player summons Deneb and uses Deneb's effect to search for an Altair. Now obviously you can't search while Thunder King's on board, so the judge gets called over. The judge will rule that you are not allowed to add Altair because Thunder King is on board, so Altair gets shuffled back into the deck. It's important to note here that since the summon of Deneb was not illegal, only the search, the Deneb is still going to remain face-up on the board.
Right, so the second thing that can happen is what we call an irreparable game state. Now this is the part where the same thing that happened as an illegal play has happened, and something cannot be determined to verify that the game state will be returned back to the original state guaranteed. So say your opponent plays upstart, draws, and then shuffles his hand, but you had something like a Solemn Judgment on the face down that you wanted to use and your player didn't give time for a response, so it would be an irreparable game state. So this actually was really prevalent with Drastic Drop-Off. So players would play Drastic Drop-Off, and then you would draw, and then they would say, oh, you shuffled your hand, so now it's irreparable because I can't tell which card was drawn. So this would actually be a game loss for the player who created the irreparable game state. So the player who shuffled their hand.
Now, however, it's important to note the difference between an accepted game state and an irreparable game state that results in a game loss. So one example of an irreparable game state resulting in a game loss would be if you were to fusion summon Gladiator Beast Heraklinos with a set monster on your side of the field and shuffle it back into the deck without letting your opponent verify that it's a Gladiator Beast monster. In this case, the person who conducted the fusion summon created an irreparable game state and would actually get a game loss. However, in the event that that player gets a game loss, the opposing player would actually be issued a warning for not acknowledging that that player conducted an illegal move.
Right, that's another really good example of an irreparable game state. So accepted game state is the last thing that could happen. And this is a case where it was really depends on the judge and where you are, but it's a case where an illegal play happens and both players kind of don't catch it until very later on in the game, and a judge would come and say this is an accepted game state, and the game will continue and no penalties would be applied to that illegal play. So an example of an accepted game state would be, I remember one time my friend was in the regionals and he exited the board and then made a gigantic Geargia play in Geargia format. And this play was probably 30 to 40 steps long. And his opponent realizes that, oh, you can't exit him because you have more cards than me. And they both look at each other and then I call a judge, and the head judge walks over and says, well, reverse all the game steps. And of course it's like a 30-step Geargia play, and my friend is sitting there trying to reverse it all, and he actually manages to do it. And the head judge says, oh, it's an accepted game state because you can't really verify all those plays. So my friend has to put back his whole board another 30 steps, so he's actually just done 90 plays at this point, and it was just nuts. And it just turned out to be an accepted game state, and the board was nuked. Again, this is an example of the discretion of the judge. So head judges have a lot of power here and can determine if a game is accepted or irreparable, and the penalties will vary differently. So something really important that we have to go through here is that if you know an illegal play is happening and you let the player do it and attempt to give them an irreparable game state so you can get a game loss, essentially a win for yourself, this is called rule sharking, and it's cheating, and it's illegal, and you should never do this. Remember, it's both players' responsibility to ensure that the game state is legal, and if you do this, you can get DQ'd, you can get banned. It's horrible, and you would honestly, you would be a horrible person for doing it.
Alright, so now we're going to go over a few different tips just on how to avoid being soft cheated when you guys are playing. So the biggest advice that I can give you guys is to make sure that you read all of the cards that your opponent is using very, very carefully, especially if they're newer cards or maybe older archetypes that you aren't as familiar with. Checking things such as the level, the type, the attribute, and the stats of a monster can be very important, and especially where monsters have effects with very long effects, it's really, really important to read those carefully. This actually happened to me maybe like a couple weeks ago. I was playing against a very good friend of mine at locals, and the card Infernoid Anunku, we both actually misread the effect, and I took his word for it. I only read the card very quickly, and he told me that it could negate spell cards, trap cards, or monster effects. And I was playing Nekroz, so this was like a really big deal for me. And I had to play around his Infernoid Anunku because I was too afraid to activate my monster effects because I didn't have very many cards in hand. But in reality, you can only negate spell cards, trap cards, or spell and trap effects with Anunku's effect. So yeah, that was partially my fault for not taking the time to read through the card carefully enough.
So another thing you should keep in mind of is just basic Yu-Gi-Oh! Theory. So a lot of players will know, if they've been playing a long time, is that if it's a traditional card, once per turn effects really mean once when the card is face up. So if it gets Book the Moon, it goes back up, you can use it again and again and again, and different cards can be used multiple times for the same effect. But newer conventional Yu-Gi-Oh! Usually has this card, in quotations, can only be used once per turn. So I can only use the Nekroz of Trishula's banishing effect once per turn, even if I summon another Nekroz of Trishula. Of course, you also have to keep in mind the use and versus activate. So if a card says it'll only be used once per turn versus it can only be activated once per turn, there's a really big difference in terms of how the card resolves if it's being negated, which really matters. So always make sure to read the cards carefully and pay attention to the exact wording.
Another very common timing for you to check for soft cheating is right before receiving game damage. Don't just take your opponent's word for it. Sometimes there are misplays that happen inside of their combo to kill you. And all you gotta do is check for these contradictions, like incorrect summonings, battle positions that were not proper. Also pay attention to effects that don't allow you to take damage or you take half damage. These effects can actually result in you actually not dying and giving you an extra turn. Now remember, right before receiving game damage, because after you accept the fact that you have lost and you've picked up your cards, this is like the point of no return. Even if you call a judge over, there's no cards to reflect the situation. Therefore, more often than not, the judge will consider it as an accepted game state and you can do nothing about it. If you scoop accepted the loss, or worse yet, if you sign the match slip, it's over and you can only accept the fact that you preemptively surrendered to an illegal play.
So overall, it's really difficult to determine whether or not a player was intentionally soft cheating or not. Because you can't really look into the player's mind and see what was going through their thoughts as they were going through the play. So as a result, judges are allowed to undergo what's called like an investigation sort of thing, where they are allowed to ask both of the parties that were involved and maybe even some people who witnessed the events going on and kind of make an educated decision from there. But overall, these investigations are relatively ineffective and they really just rule whether or not the game state is repairable or irreparable.
Yeah, usually judges would try to avoid determining if a player was intentionally cheating or not, because the penalties would obviously be very severe if they were, and they don't want to use that kind of ruling off of some circumstantial evidence. So there's a case study of a very skilled and competitive player that's relatively well known in the Yugo community, Chris LeBlanc, who was actually caught soft cheating on a feature match in a YCS round 1. So he wasn't necessarily caught cheating, but he was playing with Dolces when they first came out, and he was using Angeli multiple times per turn to generate a huge advantage. Now, if you're a Maldolce player, you would know that this would be huge for the deck, and it changes the deck dynamics entirely. But he was using it multiple times per turn, and essentially his opponent didn't catch him on it because he wasn't reading the card properly, and he was just allowed to do this. And this was a feature match, so there was people sitting around him with judges, all watching him do this, and it was fine, and it was accepted. And now Konami did not give him a game loss. They realized later on and actually took down the feature match report. But this is a really good example of how even really skilled players can be unintentionally cheating, and it's really hard to determine if they were intentionally or not, and therefore creating this kind of in-between rule called soft cheating.
Alright guys, so that's it for this video. If you guys like this video, make sure that you guys give us a thumbs up.
And if you feel like we messed up on any definitions, or if you don't agree with soft cheating at all, which I know some people don't, make sure you leave a comment below.
And of course, make sure to subscribe to see more content from us. Until next time, make sure that you guys hold on to your MSTs. That's 4.
Scene 3, take 2.
Holy shit.
And
Fucking
action.
numbers, mother. Okay. When you... Okay.